Chapter 2041. Daisy cast her eyes low. I know. I'll stay out of trouble, for all of your sake. Suddenly, something took shape in her mind, prompting her to ask, Aunt Sadie, did you catch any news about Nolace? Sadie shook her head. I doubt he's using his real name while active in the East Islands, especially since that's also where Donald is. Nolace is a cautious guy, so he must have taken up some kind of pseudonym. A pseudonym necessarily complicated their search. Daisy fell silent. She seemed to be mulling over something. Far in the East Islands, the furor was brewing in the commune. Joaquin Serrano grimaced as soon as he received the news. What's the meaning of this? That old bag appointed some outsider to take over the commune. The commune had always been the Serpent's turf. Sunny Southern had been painfully reluctant to cede control over the territory to the Serpents for so many years, and yet the same Sunny Southern decided to hand control over to a man who was not even a member of the Southern clan. Could it be that Sunny had caught on to something? Florence Serrano suddenly burst into his study. Dad. Joaquin ordered his underlings to leave him be, though he did not hide the frown from his daughter either. Can't you see I'm busy? Florence was too wrapped up in her own resentment to care. Goddamn Cameron's ass is back. Joaquin furrowed his brows. He drank his wine without a word. He had long heard of Cameron's return. The same investigation also revealed that the outsider punk who was to take over the commune was the fellow Cameron had brought home. Cameron was several years younger than his daughter, but his status as the heir to the Southern family made him important. He was a bachelor and did not seem to be seeing anyone at the moment, and now, the fact that the family appointed an outsider to manage the commune implied certain degrees of guardedness. He set his wine cup down. It occurs to me, Florence, that Cameron's at the age where he should settle down with a partner. Florence was visibly stunned. What's that supposed to mean? Joaquin stared at her matter-of-factly. I would like both of you to marry each other. Florence's furious protest was immediate. Why must I marry Cameron? Do you have any idea just how irritating he is? He just has to be this bloody contrarian against everything I do or say, and he never cares about how I feel. He insulted me in front of other people before, she erupted hotly. Do you know what kind of torment you're putting me in? Shut up. Florence froze. Her father had never talked to her like this. The man regained his composure enough to maintain some sort of calm. Listen, Florence. The Southern clan is steadily wary of us. That Cameron brat may be a thorn in your side, but he's the only son that geezer had. A marriage between you and him will benefit the entire family. Florence bit her lips. She could tell that her father was being serious about his proposal, but to suggest she became Cameron's wife out of the blue like this? Was it true? Had the Southerns really begun to grow wary of them? When it really came down to it, Florence had no real objection to the marriage. Cameron leaned hard to the feminine side of the spectrum, but he was still handsome and pleasant to the eyes. He was also highly competent. The Serpents could send all of their best fighters against him, and he still might emerge victorious. The more unruly the man was, the more pleasure one got when he eventually cowered. Florence broke out a smile. All right, Dad. I hear you loud and clear. I'll be nice to Cameron from now on. Joaquin nodded, satisfied. Good. Very, very good. We'll wait for a few days. Then I'll suggest this union. Even if that old man rejects it, I'll find some other ways to make him. Florence left the study. The corner of her lips was raised. Cameron was not the only one she wanted. That other young man she met in the restaurant today? She would bag him too. Sooner or later, all of these men would be hers. Chapter 2042. The next day, Daisy looked for Whan in the room next to hers. She was about to knock when she realized the door was not exactly closed. She peered through the lean crack and saw Whan talking to a man in front of his window. You sure that was Neil Beck? The man nodded. Yes. I dug a little deeper, too. All they know is that he's some sort of VIP Cameron Southern met while conducting business abroad. He was obviously very well regarded, considering how Mr. Southern later made him the governor of the commune, traditionally the Serpent's territory. Whan narrowed his eyes. Neil Beck. A stranger, the Southern heir, brought home. Had he not already known Knowles was rescued by Cameron, he would have never suspected Neil Beck to be a pseudonym. This Neil had to be Knowles. Please continue your work. See if you can gather more useful information. The man gave a small nod. Understood. Daisy ducked behind the wall the moment the man turned. When the door was yanked open, she came out of hiding and assumed the pretense of having just arrived. Hey, Whan. The man froze in mid-walk. He turned to his boss. Whan nodded. The man left, and the older brother fixed his eyes on Daisy. Heard it all? Daisy smiled disarmingly. What? No. No way. I just came here. Whan walked up to her and gave a light tap on her head. You're such a terrible liar. She scratched the side of her head, embarrassed. Fine, fine. You found some lead to Nolly's whereabouts, didn't you? More or less. Whan started toward the couch. He fell into his seat and picked up his coffee. But you still can't see him at the moment. It's not like I must see him, okay? She protested as she hastily took her seat next to him. Lowering her voice, she added, I just want to make sure he's okay. Whan laughed and cast a lopsided glance at her. Oh, he's very okay. Anyway, Sadie said Sonny is willing to join hands with the metropolis. Is that true? That's right. He sipped his coffee and set the cup down. Sonny undoubtedly decided to join this alliance after considering his family's future. Even the mightiest adversary becomes surmountable when you have a powerful ally. Regardless of the Southern clan's strength, they still had more than enough reasons to worry about Fabio's expansionist ambition. It was only natural that the Southern clan would consider joining an alliance. Daisy smiled. Cameron's the heir, isn't he? If we buddy up with him now, it's gonna benefit you a lot in the future, right? Whan shifted his attention to her. He could not stifle his laughter. You're actually giving your big brother's future some thought. Daisy wrapped her arms around his. And that's only because you're my big brother. Plus, there's also that lady who's on her way to being a spinster, Florence Serrano. We gotta worry about it. I think she has her eyes set on you, but I'm not about to let just any woman become my sister-in-law. Especially not someone so massively unqualified as her. There was no way they could avoid crossing paths with Florence, they had already offended her. Meanwhile, Cameron looked to be around their age, and he did not seem like a nasty person to boot. Not only could they count on him for cooperation, but he could be the shield defending Whan from Florence's advances. Whan saw through her thoughts almost a little too handily. He pinched her nose as though he could not believe her. Do you know what your plan entails? I'm gonna have to flatter someone's ego for it to work. Daisy cracked out a grin. Well, if we're gonna rely on him a little, then what's the harm in flattering our ally's ego? A few days passed. Cameron slept all the way to the afternoon before a commotion from downstairs stirred him. He heard approaching footsteps shuffling to a stop right outside the draping curtains, which separated Cameron's quarter from the world outside. The maid reported Mr. Serrano had come to talk to Mr. Southern. Cameron sat up. Long, raven-black hair spread out like a tapestry from his head. What's he doing here? Chapter 2043. The woman's eyes glided over the curtain. She could see the silhouette flitting about behind the veil. Jochen expressed his wish to marry Miss Serrano to you. The silhouette inside froze, comb still locked in black, smooth hair. A peal of laughter suddenly erupted from beyond the curtains. Oh, Jochen has such a sick sense of humor. Imagine asking me to marry a squawking chimpanzee. The woman cast her eyes to the floor. Mr. Southern has refused. Cameron was done grooming. The silhouette emerged from behind the curtains, cutting a sleek, tidy figure made even more handsome by an aura of heroism. A melange of languidness, laid-back casualness, and unflappability hung over the figure's face. So, Dad's decision to let Mr. Beck take care of the commune really threw the serpents off, didn't it? And the only solution they could come up with was political marriage. Well, sucks to be them. I'm not husband material. The woman sighed. It's a potential blow to your identity. That's what this is. Everyone knew that Sonny had a son, but only Sonny, the butler, and this woman knew who Cameron really was. An enigma in both thoughts and actions, he was, in reality, a she. The woman followed Cameron downstairs. A stormy-faced Sonny was sitting in the living room. It was quite obviously related to Jokin's request. Cameron lifted the teapot. What's with the sulk, Dad? I'm one of the two main characters in that proposal, and even I look less upset than you are. Sonny looked up. I shot it down, but that rat had a contingency plan up in his sleeves. He dared mention the promise your grandfather made to pressure me. Sonny's father used to be best friends with Jokin's father back in Jakukuri. That friendship had been the basis behind Sonny granting the Serrano family asylum in the East Islands when the latter faced a crisis. What was more, Sonny's father had even promised Jokin's father that their grandchildren should definitely marry each other in the future. Nevertheless, all it took was the passing of Sonny's father and Jokin inheriting the Serpents' leadership to expose who the Serpents really were. Sonny managed to hide that his son was really a daughter, while Jokin never had a son at all. There was no way to make their parents' promise come true, but there was an inherent problem with coming clean. If words of Cameron's real sex got out, the Southern clan and their family would be plunged into chaos. Cameron caressed her father's palm reassuringly. I'll handle this, Dad. The older man looked at her, took a deep breath, and nodded. All right. This is about your identity. I'm much more at ease knowing that you'll solve it yourself. News about the proposal spread through the island like wildfire. It was clear just how much Jokin had prepared for this. With the promise between their fathers as the foundation and the virality of the news, the Southern family's rejection would automatically become an invitation for an insurrection. Knowles set the newspaper down and looked across the table, and his eyes fixed on Cameron drinking tea. They are using that marriage proposal as a litmus test for your father's thoughts, aren't they? Cameron stared into her cup, her eyes tracing the circling steam rolling out of its surface. They grew antsy after you assumed control over the commune. They don't know what my old man's thinking, so they resorted to this tactic. Nala's eyes flicked aside for a second. If the Southerns reject them, they will mount this as an excuse to join Fabio's camp. Fabio is only too happy to see the house divided. The fact that I'm the new overseer of the commune only sends things hurling in that direction, he said. I doubt Mr. Southern had expected the Serpents to use a political marriage as a test. He had expected Jokin to be confused and anxious about Sonny's thoughts about the Serpents, but he had not predicted this tactic at all. Chapter 2044. Well, it looked like Sonny had underestimated the Serpents, after all. Cameron was a little shocked to see how thorough Nala's analysis was. Her time with Knowles had been short so far, and yet it was enough for her to realize that he was observant, shrewd, perceptive, and incredibly intelligent. He never put all his cards on the table, and he never left traces that could incriminate him. He was mysterious. The more mysterious a man was, the more unsettling he was. Had he appeared to her as an enemy, Cameron doubted she could escape him at all. She traced the rim of her teacup and smiled briskly. I'm not too worried about Jokin's scheme. It's his daughter who's the biggest thorn in the flesh. Knowles narrowed his eyes in silence. Cameron propped the side of her face with her hand and leaned onto the armrest lazily. I bumped into two foreigners in a restaurant the other day, she intoned, surveying his reaction. Brother and sister, I think. They don't look like your garden variety commoners. Knowles stiffened, and his eyes lit up. Brother and sister? Cameron crossed her legs. There was something implicative about her smile. They're here to do business, or so they said. The man was pretty pleasant to the eyes. The woman? She looked like she was hiding her real features, but you can almost see through it if you pay attention. She looked like a big-name celebrity from Zlokova. Knowles was quiet. He chewed over her words, wondering about how true it was. He suspected that this could be a test. A while later, he finally spoke noncommittally. Why are you telling me this? Cameron removed the old, soaked teabag from the pot. Because I think you know them. I think you people are more than mere acquaintances. And I do read the news. Knowles said nothing. Daisy had publicized their marriage to the world since he was reported missing in the hopes that those who rescued him would know who he was or who to turn him to. It would have been an unquestionable move to make if she remained in Bassburg. However, Cameron saw her in the East Islands and even recognized her. That meant Donald would catch on sooner or later. God. That brave, stupid girl came to look for me, didn't she? Cameron brewed a new pot and poured it into his glass cup. Looks like I scored a 10. They are from Zlokova, and they are here for you. Knowles raised the cup, but he did not drink it. Congrats on having good eyes. Cameron's smile was too faint to reach her eyes. What? Not going to meet them? Right now, that will only put them in jeopardy. Oh yeah? Cameron replied imploringly, I think they are way past that. Knowles froze. His eyelids perked, but his expression was unreadable. Cameron chuckled flippantly. They rubbed Florence the wrong way, despite having just arrived, which is not a good thing. She isn't someone to be trifled with, at all. Any guy who looks pretty enough to catch her eyes will always end up in her lap. By force, if she has to. As for the women who happen to accompany her target, she usually just feeds them to her not at all gentle dogs. Nala's grip around the cup tightened. A layer of frost seemed to have formed in his eyes. I see. But isn't Miss Serrano your betrothed? Unless, you can't marry her, but don't want your family trapped in a nasty dilemma. So now, you're hoping that I'll do the dirty work of cleaning up for you, by telling me this. Cameron could not contain her laughter. We're partners, aren't we, she said, showing no sign of denial. We're working together, all right. Knowles set the cup down. Don't worry. I won't walk back on my promise to your father, but you need to help me too. Cameron shrugged. You have my attention. I want those two foreigners to be granted protection by your family, Knowles said matter-of-factly. Cameron frowned. I didn't take you as the type to milk charity and goodwill from your benefactors. You know who I really am, and I know your secret, too, Knowles stated placidly. We are partners, and a partnership is predicated on mutual sincerity. I'm not the only one who has to pull their weight on this department, Mr. Cameron. Chapter 2045. Cameron's smile faded. Knowles did not stay to hear her answer. He picked his jacket up and left. He was certain that the answer was only going to be yes. Cameron waited until he disappeared into the door to lean against her chair, her mood pensive and thoughtful. A woman approached her from the side and informed her, Mr. Cameron? Miss Serrano invited you on a date in a restaurant. A smile shadowed Cameron's lip. And she couldn't even wait. The venue was devoid of other patrons. Clearly, Florence had the whole establishment cleared out just for her. Now, her bodyguards stood outside like a row of samurais. Cameron brought two women with her. She found Florence refining her makeup from her seat, her eyes staring at a compact mirror. Ah, Cameron! You kept me waiting for a little too long. The cap on her lipstick clicked. She looked up and flashed Cameron her most seductive smile. Cameron pulled a chair out, sat, and chortled. That's your winning make-up? You wouldn't be out of place if you stood outside a brothel. It doesn't look good on you at all, Miss Serrano. Florence's mien turned stormy. How dare this bastard suggest something like this? She took a deep breath and made sure her smile did not falter. Look, Cameron. We're gonna be married very soon, aren't we? Are these really the things you should say to your future wife? Cameron narrowed her eyes. I think I'll be getting nightmares every night if my wife looks like you. How dare you, growled Florence. Rage flickered in her eyes, but her father's order compelled her to suppress the mutiny. She gnashed her teeth and forced a smile. Listen, Cameron, the fact that I'm willing to marry you means I think you're worth it. Unless. Dare I say it? Unless you're impotent. Cameron's outward indifference made Florence break out a self-satisfied laugh. Oops, did I just get it right on the first try? TSK, TSK. How old are you, Cameron? You've never seen anyone all your life. What are you? An incel? The woman standing behind Cameron was visibly upset. Please watch your words, Miss Serrano. Ooh. Florence leaned forward and took a good look at Cameron. I mean, everyone loves a pretty boy. You're a pretty boy, aren't you? That's the dick women love sucking. Cameron laced her fingers together and set them on the table. And? How are you so sure about me never seeing anyone? Why would I ever tell you? Florence was quiet. She had indeed never gone out of her way to gather information on his love life, but that was only because he was so infuriatingly irritating. The enmity was mutual, too, so why should she waste time giving a shit about his love life? How could a man like Cameron feel nothing about a woman as seductive and alluring as Florence? Was there something even more suspicious about this weirdo? Maybe I have made a mistake, after all, she suddenly said. I'd like to apologize. She poured a cup of wine and pushed it to Cameron. The latter stared at it but said nothing. Florence raised her own cup. You wouldn't mind a toast, would you? Cameron pinched the stern between her fingers and sniffed its content. A smile crept onto her lips, a smile that did not reach her eyes. Bold of you to try such a typical, underhanded trick on me while I'm right here, Miss Serrano. Florence's smile froze, but her expression, too, seemed to have calcified. I don't think I understand your accusation, Cameron. Cameron's attention shifted to the wine. I have always been hypersensitive to alcohol. I can smell something is amiss. The color is too murky, too, so, you added some extra kick into it, didn't you? Florence visibly stiffened. You can't be serious. Cameron pushed the wine back to her. How about you sample it? Florence's hands, while placed on her lap, balled into fists. She glared into her partner's eyes like a hawk. She had spiked the wine, but it was a drug that had always been difficult to detect. Nobody else had ever suspected a thing, and yet Cameron somehow noticed it. Chapter 2046. Florence had put herself in trouble. She didn't expect Cameron to be on such high alert, but if she didn't drink it, it would mean there really was something in the drink. Once she was caught, Cameron would not let her or the serpents get away. She took over the wine glass and downed the content. The glass was empty without a single drop left. How's that? She turned and got the woman behind her to bring a new bottle of wine over. The woman brought it over, opened it, and poured some into the decanter. Cameron picked up a clean glass and poured the wine in. He then noticed how tipsy Florence looked, so he smiled. What's wrong, Miss Serrano? Not feeling well? Florence clenched her jaw. I remember that I have somewhere to get to. I need to go. The effects had kicked in. She shouldn't have used such a big dosage. Florence quickly got up and left, and Cameron didn't stop her but continued drinking alone. The woman noticed that something was wrong, so she looked toward Cameron. There really was something in that glass of wine. Too bad. I was just testing her, and she couldn't even handle it. Cameron swirled the wine around in the glass. She wasn't sensitive to alcohol and didn't know if there was something in it. She just knew Florence too well. She knew what was added because Florence had used the same tactic on many men. All the good-looking men on the East Islands would be invited to dine with her and would wake up in her bed the next day. She would use photos and scandals to blackmail the men into dating her. She didn't love them, but only treated them like stamps she could collect. It didn't matter if they were married or had girlfriends. She was the harlot who would make any man sick. Cameron just tested her a little, and she already revealed herself. Cameron waved so the woman would approach, then whispered something into her ear. She was surprised, but immediately nodded. All right. After Florence was escorted downstairs by the guards, her body felt as if 100 ants were walking all over her, but even then, she didn't want to get it on with the guards. When she got into the elevator, she bumped into someone familiar. The handsome face made her itch even more. It was the man from the cafe. Daisy was holding Wayland's arm while they happily chatted. The man had so much care in his eyes. That made her extremely unhappy. No woman would be allowed to get near the men that she was interested in. Florence rushed forward and pushed Daisy away. The sudden shove made Daisy fall to the ground. Wayland grabbed Florence by her neck and pushed her against the door while looking menacing. You? Florence didn't care if she couldn't breathe. She rested her palm on his chest. It felt cold, which was comfortable for her. Sir, I can give you everything you desire. Wayland pushed her away, and she fell to the ground. The pain woke her up a little. How could you do that to me? Daisy ignored the pain and rushed forward to slap her. Are you crazy? You're so desperate you would just jump on any man? Chapter 2047. Florence was stunned but then glared at her. You bitch. How dare you hit me? She was going to call the guards but realized she had sent them away. Daisy rubbed her wrist. I would do that any day if you hit my brother. Wayland pulled her back after seeing how crazy the woman on the floor was. You don't seem to be feeling well. You should ask someone to come and get you. After saying that, Wayland walked past her while dragging Daisy along. Florence shook with anger, but her men got there at that moment and blocked Wayland and Daisy's path. The bodyguards helped her up. Miss Serrano. Florence pointed at them and said, out of breath, leave the man. Teach that woman a lesson. Wayland looked at the few men who approached with icy cold eyes. The bodyguards signaled at each other and rushed forward to take him down. However, Wayland turned and bent the man's hand backward. The sudden pain made him howl while bending down on his knees. Everyone else became more vicious when they saw that. Wayland pushed Daisy aside and started to fight the bodyguards. The few bodyguards were no match for Wayland. He was strong and vicious, with a good defense. They couldn't touch him even when they attacked together. The handsome man, who was also agile, captivated Florence. Maybe it was because of the drug, but she wanted that man even more. Then she noticed Daisy, who was standing at one side, and her eyes flashed. She could see how much that man cared for her. Florence quietly walked behind Daisy and grabbed her from behind while pointing a sharp knife at her neck. If you don't comply, this woman's face is going to be disfigured. The cold knife ran across Daisy's face as a threat. Wayland threw the bodyguard aside, frowned, and said after a pause, you can try. Florence was stunned, but she yelled, don't you care if she dies? Daisy looked at the knife pointed at her face and couldn't help but laugh. Of course my brother cares about me. But... Daisy immediately bent her fingers backward. Florence hurt so much that she let go, and the knife fell to the floor. Daisy kicked the knife under a car and pushed the woman behind her to the floor. Daisy giggled while she ran back to Wayland after getting out of her grip. I did quite well, didn't I? She couldn't fight a group of people, but it was just Florence Serrano, it was easy. Wayland said, not bad. Florence sat on the floor with a flushed face and heavy breath. She bit her lip to stay awake. Why you dare treat me like that? I'm not going to let you get away. Daisy noticed how odd she was. Miss Serrano, you're in terrible shape. Have you been drugged? Was that why you threw yourself at my brother? Florence trembled and looked furious because Daisy noticed. Daisy leaned forward to look at her with an innocent smile. Why don't I help you calm down? Florence shuddered. What are you going to do? Daisy walked to a fire hose and then walked toward her. A stream of white water was sprayed all over her. Chapter 2048. After turning off the hose, the person on the floor froze and trembled, her makeup messed up. She was out of it for a while, because that was the first time she was treated that way. She then yelled at the top of her lungs, "I'm going to kill you." Daisy put her hands on her waist. "I helped you cool down, but you're trying to kill me. So ungrateful." Whan cleared his throat and walked behind her. "All right, let's not stay here." Daisy nodded and was going to leave with Whan when a few cars blocked the exit of the garage, and a group of men got out. The leader was Manuel Estrada. Manuel saw Florence sitting on the floor and shivering while her men were injured. He took off his jacket, ran toward her, and wrapped the jacket around her. What happened? He helped her up, and Florence pointed to Daisy with hate. "Kill this bitch." Whan stood in front of Daisy and faced them. "Miss Serrano, are you sure you want to turn this into a bigger issue?" Florence looked delirious. "Why? Are you feeling bad?" She cackled. "If you are, just listen to me and be my man. I'll spare her life." The man was athletic and had an attractive face. He was good enough for her. But if he still wouldn't comply, he wouldn't be able to fight so many people, even if he was the best fighter. She wouldn't mind disabling him. As long as his face and body were still alright, she would be fine with taking care of him. Whan frowned. There were a dozen of them and only one of him. He wasn't afraid, but he was worried for Daisy. Daisy ground her teeth. "Why don't you make it a fair fight?" Florence smirked. "Aren't you very good at fighting? What are a few more men?" She looked toward Whan, who was silent. "Sir, are you done considering? You're not getting out of this today. Are you going to obey or continue fighting?" Daisy balled up her fists. She regretted not learning more self-defense moves from Sadai, and now that Sadai wasn't there, she would be a burden to Whan. Daisy was regretful and didn't want Whan to comply with the woman, but how could she help? Whan noticed how she was feeling and consoled her. "It's fine, don't worry." Daisy grabbed him. "I don't want you to go." Florence saw that Whan looked as if he was going to obey her, so she smiled. She loved clever men. Once he complied and bowed down at her feet, she would consider how to torture that ugly woman. Whan moved Daisy's hand away and walked toward Florence with a blank expression. Daisy yelled, "Whan!" However, there was a commotion among the crowd. Then a few men were tossed around and fell at Florence's feet, unconscious. Florence's alertness heightened while Manuel stood in front of her. "Who's there? Such a huge formation. What is my fiancé in name trying to do?" The men opened up a path, and Cameron slowly walked through. Chapter 2049. Florence wasn't expecting someone to derail her plan. Cameron, the asshole, was messing up her plans again. She started sweating while she clenched her jaw. "Cameron, this is none of your business. Stay out of it." Cameron was the heir of the Southerns, and even her father Jochen wouldn't dare lay a finger on him, especially when Cameron was a very good combatant and was really good with hidden weapons. Even Fabio's men were wary of his tricks. On top of that, he was as good a fighter as Manuel, and even if there were a group of them, they would be no match for him. Cameron crossed her arms and smiled. "You're supposed to be my fiancé. How am I supposed to feel when you're trying to grab a man in the middle of town?" Daisy was shocked, but didn't say anything. Florence is Cameron's fiancé. He has such terrible taste." Florence's face turned pale, and she was angry, but had to keep it together. Her father wanted her to marry Cameron, but if he used this chance to tell on her, her father would probably kill the man. She wouldn't let Whan die before even getting a taste of him. She forced a smile. "No, there must be a misunderstanding. They've offended me, and I just want to teach them a lesson." "Nonsense." Daisy added fuel to the fire. You were just drooling over how good-looking my brother is. She then walked next to Cameron. Mr. Southern, your fiancé doesn't even respect you. She would have cheated on you if you didn't show up. Florence's expression changed. Shut it, bitch. Cameron was silent for a moment, then she suddenly laughed. Daisy was shocked. How could he laugh when he was going to be cheated on? Cameron turned to face Daisy, approached her, and raised her chin with a finger. Little girl, I realized that you've gotten even more adorable after not seeing you for just a few days. Daisy's chin froze, but she pushed his hand away and smiled awkwardly. Thanks. Cameron nodded. Good acting too. Daisy's back froze while she looked toward him. What did he just say? She didn't think too much about that but felt that Cameron was a little weird. If another man did what he did to her, she would feel absolutely disgusted by it and would probably slap their dirty claw away. But, when he did that, she didn't feel annoyed and, for a moment there, didn't even see him as a man. Was it because of his face that was prettier than most girls? Florence saw Cameron flirting with an ugly woman right in front of her and was going to have none of that. Cameron was annoying and arrogant toward her but was so nice and gentle to this ugly woman. She smirked. Cameron, you're one to talk. You're flirting with this hideous woman too. Daisy had had enough of her name, calling, but couldn't say anything about it, just so she wouldn't get Whan in trouble. Thus, she swallowed the anger. Cameron smiled. Don't you have a mirror at home? Manuel exploded and snarled, Mr. Southern, what is the meaning of that? You have no right to speak here. Cameron stared at him coldly. Florence, you need to train your dogs better. Manuel's neck turned red, and the veins on his hands popped. Florence looked at her. Cameron, I just want to teach these two a lesson. Can't you just mind your own business? Chapter 2050. Did you ask for permission before fighting in my territory? Cameron slowly walked toward her. Or do you think my father has no control over the serpents, so you can do whatever you want here? Florence trembled. So you're helping these outsiders? Anyone who's here would be a guest of my family. Even if they need to be taught a lesson, it's up to us to do it. The serpents have power here, unless someone else to work with. That statement was a bomb that exploded in Florence's face. Cameron must have noticed something, or he wouldn't have said that with so much conviction. That would be the serpent's end. She knew well that her father was planning to betray the Southern clan, but it hadn't happened yet. If Sonny knew about that, the serpents would probably be sent off the island. She looked at Whan and clenched her jaw. She had to let this piece of fatty meat go. She wasn't happy about it, but she had to know her place. I'll let you take care of them then. I hope you'll do us justice, Florence said through her gritted teeth. People who knew what was happening knew that she was forcing Cameron to take adequate action. If he didn't, the serpents wouldn't let this go, and it would be a reason for them to revolt. Cameron smiled but didn't reply while Florence left with her men. Daisy walked to Whan's side. Whan, I was so worried. We're lucky. That Cameron showed up, but why would he help us? Daisy looked toward him. Cameron was walking toward them at that moment and smiled. I guess you're going to have a hard time on this island. It's best to get a ticket out of here soon. Whan casually swiped the dust away from his shirt. We have you. Cameron paused and crossed her arms. I won't always be here to help you. Whan smiled. You've helped us twice. I'm sure there's a third time coming. The help came at the right time. The first time was at a cafe, this time at a garage. That meant that Cameron had always had someone following Florence. It didn't matter who she was fighting against tonight. Cameron would be there to stop it. Cameron's political marriage with Florence was just part of Jokin's plan. Whan had looked into Florence's background. She had had her ways with a multitude of men. Florence was drugged today, and he knew that she had met Cameron at the restaurant before that, so her drugging must be linked to Cameron. She wanted to use her tactics with the other men on Cameron, but it backfired. Cameron looked into his eyes. The man looked outstanding, handsome like no lace. However, no lace had mixed parentage, so he looked like a black tulip, dangerously mesmerizing and mysterious. This man wasn't too far off from no lace, especially with his deep-set amber eyes. They were sharp, cold, and piercing, elegant, yet deadly.